Coming up on today's Locked On Bucks, we preview the post-All-Star break schedule and get to some very interesting comments Giannis Antetokounmpo made at team practice just the other day. We get into that discussion coming up after this.
You are Locked On Bucks, your daily Milwaukee Bucks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into Locked On Bucks. I'm Justin Garcia, joined as always by Camille Davis. We thank you for making this your first listen of the day and for checking out the Locked On Bucks newsletter. If you have not done so yet, you can subscribe for free at lockedondaily.com and get your day started with the all-new free Locked On Bucks newsletter. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Well, Camille, we are well rested now coming out of the All-Star break. The Bucks with more than a week off. They return to the floor tonight to take on the Los Angeles Clippers. And we've talked in the past about the schedule that's in front of the Bucks, not just immediately out of the break, but for all intents and purposes, your full post All-Star break schedule. I do want to get to some of that in just a moment here, but we mentioned a lot of comments that we heard from Giannis, and I do want to get to the ones that have seemed to have really taken off quite a bit in our next segment, but he is listed as questionable on the injury report for tonight's game and had mentioned he was able to do some things. It sounds like it's going to be a game time decision tonight against the Clippers. Doc Rivers himself said, we went pretty hard at practice today and went through some things. We didn't go that hard. So I guess we'll see how he feels. But Giannis even saying, wouldn't confirm that he's 100%, just that he feels better. And we'll see where it is. But the big thing that hung over it, which, you know, is common sense, was Giannis himself reiterating the message we had heard from Doc Rivers and others. Like, look, the important part is whatever I need to do to make sure I'm healthy come the playoffs. Like, that's what's on my mind. And the part that struck me about that is we've heard from Giannis so many times. Doc has talked about it too. Like, this guy always wants to play and he's disappointed when he's ruled out. And I'm sure that's still the case. But hearing Giannis himself acknowledge, yeah, some games where I want to play and I'm 70%, it's probably best to not worry about it and make sure let's not have anything happen here because I got to be healthy in the playoffs.
Yeah, it's the growth that comes with being an older player in the league for Giannis. We've seen Giannis play through some crazy things. When you think back to the finals run that the Bucks had and the hyperextended knee that he had that should have kept him out weeks upon weeks upon weeks, and yet and still he was back in after, you know, a week and a half ready to play in the NBA finals after that injury. So we know Giannis and his tolerance for pain and how he can push through so many different things. And hearing him talk after practice about the mind shift that he's had about taking care of himself and taking time off. What really stood out to me was him talking about the calf injury he got last year and mentioning, like, I felt it for a little bit, but just was like, hey, you know, it's going to be stiff for a little bit. I know I can play through it. And then he got hurt and then missed the entire playoffs again. And him realizing this feels a little similar to what I felt last year, but instead of me trying to play through it, I'm going to take the time I need, sit down, let it heal up, and then keep playing after that because I do want to be healthy come playoff time. And seeing the growth in his game in that way, I think is an important step because we applaud Giannis for his ability to play through pain when it matters and gut through it. And as we've heard Doc say, like, that impresses me more in May and June than it does in January and February. So seeing the growth in Giannis as well as a player, just mentally of being like, hey, I understand my body even a bit better now. And I am trying to do what I can do to make sure I'm there healthy is, I think, should be a welcome sign for Bucks fans going forward as well.
Yeah, he you mentioned part of that, but he had said, I felt a little discomfort in my calf, and I said this year I want to be smart. One of my goals is to be available for the playoffs. We're 30 games away. It's a long time, but at the end of the day, and that's the number one telltale sign if something was actually said by Giannis, does it include at the end of the day? My main focus is take care of my body, be smart. I tried to play, but I still felt that discomfort. the day after Charlotte. So I think it's smart to take a few days off and to go into rehab protocol, take care of my body, get my calf right, and get back to healthy. I know that's the challenge and the difficult part of all of this is we can point to, hey, just let him rest and make sure he's healthy and ready to go for the playoffs. And I do subscribe to that. But even doing that, it's no guarantee that something else isn't going to happen along the way, or that something won't trigger in that calf injury. And that's the other thing that Giannis has been asked about. If it's, I guess fear would be the wrong way to put it, but is it at least something that's in the back of your mind? And, said, I'm just very aware of my body. And I kind of felt the same. I had that same feeling. I had the pain I had before I got hurt last year. So kind of saying, look, I starting to feel this was going down that path. So that's where I fully agreed. Yeah, let's just shut this thing down for the time being and go through protocols. But you and I think, talked about this on the mailbag episode with Frank, and we've talked about it in other places too. That fear word, I mean, I don't know that Giannis saying the right things and saying, look, I'm just doing what I can to be healthy for the playoffs. That's reassuring. But hearing it kind of started to feel like what I was starting to experience leading up to that soleus strain. That's ultimately going to be the biggest fear that every Bucks fan has from here on out.
It's going to be, and it should be, because we understand that for this team to reach the heights that fans are dreaming of, which is another championship, it's going to require a healthy Giannis, a healthy Dame. And if those two aren't healthy or ready to go, it tanks everything else that you're trying to do. And that's no disrespect to the rest of the guys on this team. It's just the reality of how this team is constructed, especially with the Khris Middleton trade. Like, you're really going all in on Giannis and Dame being your top two guys, the two guys who are really going to carry you, and everyone else is playing a role around them. So it's really important to try to get to the playoffs healthy, but there's no guarantee of that. The only thing that you can look at and take some solace in the fact is just that he seems to be more aware of his body, and he's not as willing to push through things in the regular season that we've seen him do before in the past that could lead to injury. But we're dealing in probability and what ifs and hypotheticals when it comes to, can you get injured? Are you getting injured? Like, it's hard to call it out, but I think that the important part of it is just the awareness that he has and the desire to get back to the playoffs healthy, which is not to say that he didn't want to play in the playoffs last year, but it's just understanding, like, based on what has happened recently, I know I need to make a change, which is also look at his game and the mid-range game that he has developed and really leaned into. Part of that was also like, hey, can I find a way to expand my game where I can take some of the stress off of my body from continuously going to the paint and banging with guys the entire game? And it's not as if he added the mid-range in and took out the drives, but it's another aspect of his game to keep his body a little bit fresher, to stretch his game in different ways. And just seeing Giannis continue to grow mentally in his game is something that you need to do, especially now that he's 30 now. Like, he's coming into the older age of players here. So just finding those ways and taking care of your bodies is of the utmost importance.
Yeah. And I mean, the growth too, to kind of recognize and say somewhere in that same interview of, look, the injury, what was it? April 9th, I think, April 8th, somewhere around there last year. Like, it didn't occur there. Like, I started to feel some soreness and I started to feel the discomfort for a week or so leading up to it. And I just, we were getting ready for the playoffs and essentially playing through it. And that was one of the things that he kind of took away from that injury to this one of, it's starting to feel the same way. So yeah, I'll sign off on resting here. I would guess he doesn't play tonight against the Clippers, and just the way that Doc had, again, as only Doc Rivers can say, we went hard, but not that hard. And Giannis saying, we'll see if I'm 100% tomorrow. Questionable on the injury report too. I would guess he does not play. I'm not sure about Damian Lillard either. He's also listed as questionable, and Doc said that too. We'll see with both of those guys how they're feeling tomorrow. But it is a back-to-back for this team. So either way, I don't think we're going to see them in both games. And then, especially for Giannis, the interesting piece is, okay, well, do we play you tonight? Because logic would say, if there's a game we feel like we can get without Giannis and or Dame, it's against the Washington Wizards. But also, we're assuming Khris Middleton's going to make his Wizards debut in that game. So there's a little bit of added extra specialness there as well. So I guess we're going to hear from Doc Rivers at 5:15 later today. And either we'll hear then immediately Giannis is out and we'll see him going through warmups, or we won't see him and then you'll kind of assume Giannis is out. So it's going to be this afternoon that we have a better idea of where that's at. He also made some other comments, though, Camille, and these are the ones that have really taken off. So I do want to get to that in terms of Giannis's long-term fit in Milwaukee. We'll open up that conversation coming up after this. This next segment of Locked On Bucks is brought to you by FanDuel. When the game tips off, the NBA action is just getting started. There's no better place to get in on it than with FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game, so even if you miss the opening tip or want to bet on a fourth quarter comeback, you can stay in the action. And if you're looking for a bigger payout, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay. When you use FanDuel's live betting feature, it allows you to keep track of every moment of the game, whether you're backing your team for a late-game rally or picking a player to hit a clutch three-pointer. You'll never feel like you missed your chance with FanDuel. Plus, the app is easy to use, and when you win, you get paid instantly. Right now, new customers to FanDuel can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That is FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. So the other big piece that came from this Giannis discussion, as we mentioned, had to do with his future in Milwaukee. And look, I think a lot of us, certainly hope is a big part of this. But as I've often said, Camille, hope is not a strategy. You do get the sense like, hey, Giannis is just different. And I know the organization has changed, people in the front office that were instrumental in Giannis coming here and getting his family here have come and gone. But when you hear Giannis talk, you hear things like loyalty, and his personality is much more that of a small town family guy than what you see in other outlets. So I think that kind of compounds to a lot of us saying, I can never really see Giannis leaving here. Not to mention, look, if it comes down to it, I just struggle with seeing, and this is kind of what he got to. I've always struggled with seeing Giannis being the guy that would play the villain, essentially, and say, look, I'm requesting a trade. Get me out of here. And I think a lot of fans would say, okay, you've given us enough. We're going to root for you wherever it is you go. But it's still, you're putting on the black hat when you do that. So that's another thing that I've always kind of filed away. And in this same session, he was talking about his future in Milwaukee. He was asked about an interview that he gave to, I think, a Greek outlet where the gist of it was basically, I wouldn't ask for a trade from the Bucks. They would have to kick me out of Milwaukee.
And I'm sure Bucks fans rejoiced at seeing Giannis just make note like, hey, that's not my personality type. I'm not here looking to ask for a trade. Like, they would have to kick me out. And the question came about, of course, because of the Luka trade, which caught everyone in the NBA off guard of thinking, wow, I can't believe this franchise would trade away a 25, 26-year-old franchise player after they got to the finals. So a lot of players started just questioning like, man, am I safe? But the flip side to that is that what we've seen for years with superstars, if they're in a situation where they don't feel like winning is realistic, they ask out. We saw it with how Dame ended up in Milwaukee, someone who was a franchise cornerstone, name all through those record books. But with the direction of the team, he was just like, my time here has coming to a close. Like, I want to go somewhere else. And to hear Giannis say, like, they'll have to kick me out, it does warm the heart, makes me smile. But the flip side to that is that the Bucks have to continue to do the things that have kept him in town. And Giannis has been really consistent with his message, which is why all the years when it's all these teams photoshopping and the fans are photoshopping Giannis in their jerseys, and they're like, that's going to be the free agent edition that we get. as long as the Bucks continue to field teams that can be competitive and Giannis feel like they're in a position where they can win, the partnership between those two entities seem like it will continue going until Giannis decides to hang it up. And that is seeing where Giannis started when he came to Milwaukee in 2013 as a guy who we thought might have to, play in at that time the D League or be overseas for a while, and to see what he's become. It's a really special partnership. I've said for so many times that Giannis feels like Milwaukee's little brother at this point, where you watched your brother grow up, accomplish some big things, and how proud you feel about him being here. So I'm sure Bucks fans will join me in saying, like, we hope that continues to be the case with Giannis saying, like, I still want to be in Milwaukee.
Just to make sure we don't get any of the actuallys on your case, it was the D League when Giannis was drafted. It didn't become the G League until what, I think 2019.
Yep.
But the full quote from Giannis too was, look, the NBA is a business. If I got traded, I would do my job, but I don't think I would ever text and ask for a trade. I am not this kind of guy. They would have to kick me out. And that then prompted the follow-ups of, what's your reaction? Or are you surprised when people kind of question you saying you want to stay in Milwaukee long-term, even through multiple extensions signed, not asking for a trade? Does that surprise you? And to that, he said, a lot of people don't know me. A lot of people know me through things that they read or when they watch me on TV. A lot of people see what other players do and assume that I would do the same. But I'm going to be very honest with you. I've done what I said I would do since day one, and it hasn't changed. That's why God blesses me and puts me in position to wake up every single day and do what I love. Now, at the end of the day, I'm not going to be given a championship, but I have the opportunity. Some people don't even have the opportunity to wake up and think about a championship or think about going out there and competing on an NBA game. Mm-hmm. But at the end of the day, to answer your question, it's okay that people don't believe in me. A lot of people did not believe in me growing up. That's not going to change. So, yeah, I mean, it backs up the actions that we've seen from Giannis as well. And my big takeaway from that, because we've heard, not necessarily Giannis demanding things, but I think it's fair to say putting pressure on. And even some of the statements that Giannis has made at season's end in the past of, we got to be competitive. And like, that's my expectation here. I kind of take the history of that and all of these comments as well to mean, like, it's not my thing to say, look, I believed in you and this is wrong, so trade me and let's just restart. But it is let's see where this is headed. And that's when I decide if I'm signing extensions. That's what we saw, 2 years ago, a year and a half ago, when shortly after the Damian Lillard trade, he signs an extension. And I think that's kind of what we're facing. Maybe not the full-scale LeBron James treatment where it's an annual thing. But I think that's more it. I'm not going to ask for a trade, but I'm also not going to commit to this long-term if I don't believe in the vision and don't believe that we have a chance to compete. And he has every right to do that.
Mm-hmm. He does. And that's the superstar aspect of it. Like, we always look at Giannis a bit differently because of the loyalty that he has and how much he's talked about wanting to stay here, be a one-team superstar, stay in Milwaukee his entire career. Again, with the caveat of need to make sure I feel like I'm able to compete day in and day out. And just because we haven't seen Giannis do some of the things that other superstars have done when they're wielding their power in that sense of being more direct or causing a little bit more ruckus than what we've seen Giannis do, does not mean that him as a superstar does not also want to make sure he remains in a competitive situation. And the other part of that, it comes down to the organization as well. Like, can you keep doing what you're doing? And will you have a sense of loyalty to that guy throughout your franchise? Will you go like the later on in his career, the Lakers route with Kobe, where it was like, here's another contract here so you can end your career here. Like, we understand the level of play isn't necessarily where it was before. We don't have the guys around you, but we know you're getting ready to wrap this up. We're going to commit this money to you. Or is it a Dallas situation where they have a statue outside with Dirk on it saying loyalty never fades away, and then they trade away a franchise player who was committed to being in that city? So I love hearing Giannis talk about what he is expecting and how he feels about this team and how he doesn't want to be the guy to request a trade. But it's just have to remember it's a partnership between the two entities. So like both sides have to continue doing what it is that they promised that they would do for the other party, as well as having communication lines open to keep sure that this partnership can last.
Yeah. And as you pointed out, the Luka trade is what prompted all of this. A couple of comments that we see here about buyout market talk. I think we addressed a lot of that in the mailbag episodes with Frank. I don't really have an answer on that. Like I don't know who's out there. Lonnie Walker's been kicked around, but Lonnie Walker
just signed, didn't he?
Just signed, yeah, with the 76ers. So, or excuse, not with the 76ers, but he with the Sixers, right? Yeah, Lonnie Walker is off the table for the Bucks, but I think that's kind of the scope of who it is you would be looking at. Like you have to keep in mind anybody making the full mid-level or above is off the table for the Bucks because they're a first apron team. So I'm not quite sure who's going to be out there. That I think it's kind of we'll wait to see if there's anything else that's out there. Otherwise, let's just wait until the last moment to save a little bit of money and we'll upgrade Ryan Rollins' contract here. The other one, just to level set this one as well. We could have traded Dame for Luka Doncic. There's no reporting on that, and there's no indication. The Mavericks specifically targeted a player like Anthony Davis because they wanted defense. I don't see Dallas then saying, let's go with a backcourt of Kyrie Irving and Damian Lillard. Right. So, it would have been great if you could somehow pair up Giannis Antetokounmpo and Luka Doncic. But, so a tough one tonight against a very, very strong defense in the Los Angeles Clippers. And as we just mentioned, it may be another game where you don't have 60 points on the floor with Giannis and Damian Lillard. So we'll take a quick look at that matchup and the rest of this schedule for the Bucks, which is pretty brutal, as we have kind of foreshadowed and told you all along. Once you get into the February, March components of the schedule, we'll take a look at how it begins coming up after this. So a back-to-back coming right out of the All-Star gate here. And it is, I think, a 5 games in 8 day stretch for the Bucks, where they've got more back-to-backs coming up in March. I think they have 3 back-to-backs in like a 10 or 11 day span in the month of March too. So not only do you have that volume of games, they have 6 back-to-backs to get through here in the second half of the season, and I believe only one team has more. And your opponent win percentage among the best in the league. I think it's the 6th most difficult starting the post All-Star break schedule. So the point of all of it is it's going to be incredibly challenging, and that's, I think, the tough part for a lot of Bucks fans of balancing the health component. And everything we talked about in the first segment of the show is, look, none of this matters if you don't have Giannis and or Damian Lillard in the playoffs. So I still expect the Bucks to finish on that 4-5 line. But that's one thing to keep an eye on, because the separation is not massive. You know, you still have 2 games with the Pistons that could determine a lot of things.
Mm-hmm.
Your final 2 games of the season are against the Detroit Pistons. And as we sit here coming out of the break, Pistons are just 2 back of the Bucks in the loss column in the standings. You got the Miami Heat this weekend. They're 4 back in the loss column. They kind of hit the skids a bit, but still, those are games that can make a big difference here. So we had said for the longest time, when you looked at that record against the Cavs, the Celtics, and Knicks, while it's disappointing, the important part was your record is the opposite against teams like the Pacers, the Pistons, the Magic. The Hawks, I think, were the only team of that group that beat them, and the Heat and Bulls. So continuing that will go a long way in ensuring you at least stay on that 4-5 line,
which is going to be really important for this team. Now, we've heard Doc and some of the other players say, like, the standings don't necessarily matter. What matters is that you're firing all cylinders, you're playing your best ball, you're peaking at the right moments heading into the playoffs. And I agree, that is the most important part of it all. But I do think that if you can try to get home court, if you can finish as the 4th seed in the East, it will do the Bucks some good, in large part because when you look at the top teams in the East and the West, at that. The 6 teams on the East, 6 teams in the West that are currently in those locked in playoff positions. The Bucks have the worst road record of all of those teams. They have not been as strong away from home as they have been at home, which tends to be the case for most teams. But generally, we've seen the Bucks be a stronger road team than what we have so far this season. So for me, if they can get home court, it will be important for them. But I do acknowledge that ultimately health matters more than anything, the matchups that you get. So as they go through this last stretch of the season here, it is going to be important for them to maintain that distance between the teams that are below them in the standings and see if they can catch up to the Pacers right ahead of them, a game ahead of them in the standings as well for that 4 spot. And when you look at the competition around them, as you mentioned, the Bucks have I think it's the 7th most difficult schedule after the break here, but it's the most difficult schedule in the Eastern Conference. The 6 teams above them are all in the West. So when you're looking at just the conference alone, like the Bucks have a gauntlet of games ahead of them. You mentioned the fact that they have 3 back-to-backs in the month of March. I mean, you're starting the All-Star break with a back-to-back immediately. And then come March, you have a back-to-back March 4th, March 5th, a back-to-back March 8th, March 9th, a back-to-back March 15th and 16th. So I understand too when the Bucks were talking about possibly having to postpone that Heat game, and they were like, we really don't want to do that because we know what it's going to do to our schedule. You can really understand why when you're looking through, like they don't have many days where they have 2 days off in between games. So for a team that's a bit older, well, not as old as before, but with your star players that are a little bit older, it is important to try to get through that gauntlet of games healthy.
They have, I think, just 2 stretches left of 2 days off between games, and it's in the same week. It's, again, part of the weird schedule that the Bucks have where it's the first week of March. You have 2 days off, then you play back-to-back, then you have 2 days off, then you play a back-to-back, and it's basically every other game, every other day, the rest of the way. So, yeah, if you would have had to make up that game and postponed it, you'd be playing 30 games out of the All-Star break, and you would definitely have 7 back-to-backs, maybe even more if they had to tweak things around more with the schedule. The strength of schedule, I think, is important to point out as well. The Knicks aren't far behind the Bucks, but the Knicks have built up pretty sizable advantage there. And you look at the rest of the East, a lot of teams are kind of in the middle of the pack, except for the Boston Celtics have one of the easier schedules the rest of the way. And so do the Philadelphia 76ers, who, Camille, I still don't know what their plan is. They have as many wins as the Brooklyn Nets. They're the 11th seed right now. The Bulls have kind of indicated they're ready to just bow out of the playoff mix and start to softly rebuild this team, but they kept winning games leading into the All-Star break. And it does kind of seem like everything would say, if you're Philadelphia, you're tied with the Brooklyn Nets. Joel Embiid saying what he did on that broadcast where the Sixers played the Bucks. Like, I don't know. I would look at this as my opportunity to say, I know it's not a guarantee, but let's just shut him down for the rest of the season. Let's say he needs knee surgery. Let's say Paul George needs surgery in that finger. Let's shut him down as well. And let's hope teams like the Raptors and Brooklyn Nets will win games, occasional game that they shouldn't win. And we drop down into that mix with a strong chance of keeping our first round pick this year.
It will be interesting to see what Philly does, because even though they are where they are in the standings, knowing that Embiid's there, like it feels like you can't fully count them out, even though we've seen the product on the court this year. And I think that was that Philly game against the Bucks, wasn't it? When the broadcast mentioned the fact that Embiid said his knee.
Oh, by the way, Embiid told me his knee is probably going to require surgery.
And it's like, wait, what? He's going to need another surgery after this. So like, why is he playing? But I think the next couple of weeks will dictate the course for the Sixers. Like if they come out of the break winning games and they feel like they have
tonight against the Celtics, by the way, like that's the type of game they win.
Right. And you can kind of catch up a little bit in that way. I could see them being like, we're going to postpone shutting anybody down. But if things go badly out of the break, I think it is realistic that the Sixers say, like, you know what, kind of a lost season. We are going to just hang it up. But isn't their draft pick going to the Thunder this year?
Yeah.
So it's a tough situation for them to be in, because it's not like they can, I don't think they can, well, it's a lot of season to go still, in the sense of, can they lose enough games to be bad enough to regain their draft pick, or is it kind of like a lost cause for them there? But that's a team to watch when thinking about the Bucks. Like, if the Sixers shut it down, that's one other team that you don't have to worry about as much. The Bulls, as you've mentioned, that soft rebuild, but you got like the Heat, the Hawks, the Magic, the Pistons, the Pacers. Those are those teams around the Bucks that you're going to have to really keep an eye on.
I mean, in frankly, it's probably the Pacers and Pistons. Like, the Magic are 5 back of you in the loss column, and you've won the season series against Orlando. Atlanta's 5 back in the loss column as well. So it's probably those two teams. And again, you have thankfully put yourself in a position to win the season series against the Pacers and the Pistons. And, you know, I think we both agreed too, like, the important part is to stay, even if it's 5th, stay on the 4-5 line. You know, we've talked about this the last few years. There is no easy path anymore. So it's not a, hey, stay here because it means you avoid the Boston Celtics. And you'd only have to go through this juggernaut Cleveland Cavaliers team that got even better at the All-Star break. To me, the important part of it is, look, you're going to have to beat good teams anyway to reach the finals and to win your conference. But if you're the 4 seed, it means you only have to beat one of those 2 teams in the first 2 rounds. So at most, you're going to have to beat 2 of those 3 teams. If you're the 6th seed, you're playing either the Celtics or the Knicks in the first round, and then you're playing the other team, if you win that series, theoretically, in the second round. So to me, that's the importance of staying 4th or 5th.
Yeah, it is. And again, it goes back to the whole debate of what we mentioned in the last segment of, hey, we want to be playing our best ball. We want to make sure we're peaking at the right time, because it doesn't matter who you put in front of us. We're going to have to beat good teams. So we want to make sure that we're playing our best ball at that time. And the flip side is like, well, if you can find a way to get the best matchups for your team going forward, then like try to figure that out. But ultimately, with the way that this Bucks season has gone before the All-Star break, I think inconsistent is the word I would use to describe the first 2/3 of the season before the break, of just, you see spurts of really good ball being played, and then you see a 10-game stretch where they're 500 or under 500, and they bounce back and they have another stretch. I'm going to be really curious to see, understanding that this is the final sprint to the postseason here, if this team can put it together consistently over the next 30 games, which might be a challenge with the schedule. It might be a challenge with if they're resting guys and guys are in and out the lineup. And it also might be a challenge because they also have to develop chemistry now with Kuz on the court, with Giannis and Dame. So there's a lot of different factors that play for this Bucks team. But if they can find a way to put together some consistent ball heading into the playoffs, I'll feel good about their chances.
Bucks are 12th in net rating, according to Cleaning the Glass. And that was the other thing of, are they beating good teams? Philadelphia is, that we saw in the comments. They're actually not. Neither of these two are. The Bucks are 2-12 in those games against your top 10 teams in net rating. The Sixers are 3-13. So neither record is great, but certainly for the Bucks, 2-12 is the troubling part. Like, there's 2 big things to keep an eye on the rest of the season. That, because the Bucks were so good at it a season ago, and you're going to have a lot more opportunities with your second half schedule. You got one more game against the Cavs, one more game against the Oklahoma City Thunder. I believe, do they have one more game with the Knicks? I believe. Yes. You got 2 games with the Denver Nuggets, one more game with the Houston Rockets, one more game with the Timberwolves. You still got the Mavericks on your schedule. And then tonight's opponent, the Clippers. So all of these teams are top 10 in net rating. So you're going to have a lot more, as Brewers fans love to point out, bites at the apple in that sense for the Bucks. But that and net rating, net rating and clutch is the other thing that I really am keeping an eye on in the post All-Star break schedule for the Bucks, because they've been great defensively, but they are one of 3 teams that have a sub 100 offensive rating in clutch minutes. The Wizards and Miami Heat, the only 2 other teams. So the Bucks, 96.2, second worst offensive rating in the clutch. Defense has been good, but the offense has not been. And that's kind of been a large story of this season so far. Surprising defense, outpacing expectations. The offense not quite there yet. So those are going to be 2 important things for the Bucks. Can you beat good teams, and can you lift that offense down the stretch in these close games. Tonight, the Bucks and the Clippers, again, we'll know this afternoon, probably around 5:15, whether or not Giannis and Damian Lillard are playing in this game tonight against the Los Angeles Clippers. And then tomorrow, we assume the Washington Wizards debut of Khris Middleton against the Milwaukee Bucks. So we'll take a look at that one as well. That'll do it for today's show, though, and a lot of comments and questions about Jericho Sims as well. I would direct you to the mailbag shows because we talked quite a bit about Jericho Sims and why we feel like we haven't seen him so far this season. That'll do it for today's show, though. For Camille, I'm Justin. We will talk with you guys once again tomorrow on Locked On Bucks.